Welcome to The Right to Reason. I am Robert Stanley, and this is episode 38. This one gets weird. And that's what Callie Wright from the Gaytheist Manifesto talks about. Why is the topic of transgender rights so weird to us? She holds up a mirror to the participants of this cultural shift that's taken place in America right now and forces us to ask some hard questions and reason out some difficult truths about gender itself. Gender, Jesus, and Genitals starts right now.
And let me assure you that we are going to take our fight for economic justice, for social justice, for environmental sanity, for a world of peace.
And I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt. And I claim that right.
One aspect of American U.S. life and culture that I think that does deserve respect and admiration is protection of freedom of speech. The U.S. is unique in the world in that respect.
Hi, this is Callie Wright from the Gaytheist Manifesto, and you have the right to reason.
Callie Wright is a great friend and a very well-spoken member of the LGBTQ community. We cover a broad range of topics such as orange mocha frappuccinos. And what does a transgender person feel like? Hormone replacement therapy? What does it mean to be a man? Well, I mean, what does it mean to be a woman, for that matter? Is it all chromosomes? Are you a man because you have a penis? We talk about penises, trans people in locker rooms. Quentin Tarantino is directing the new Star Trek movie. Yeah, it just goes sideways and nerds out for a minute. Do trans people get their dicks cut off? That's toward the end. It gets intense. Yeah, I mean, it's real. We discuss how the surgery works, all that stuff. She's amazing at making these things that seem kind of wild sound pretty simple. And after hearing her, I have no doubt that you'll come away with the same clear understanding of the stuff that I did. She's fantastic. If you want to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/right or at our website, therighttoreason.com. After hearing this, you'll likely want to check out Callie's podcast, The Gaytheist Manifesto. I love it. All right, enough build-up. Let's give you what you want to hear. Callie Wright.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies.
We very naturally, as a cognitive and behavioral imperative, we form descriptions of the world and we try to figure out what's going on.
If you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. It works. Bitches.
Okay, crazy people, I'm so happy to be here with Callie Wright from the Gaytheist Manifesto. Callie, how you doing?
I am well, my friend. How are you?
I'm so cool. Still having my coffee. Still
I am too. It's fine.
Together.
Got this Starbucks vanilla flavored coffee, which is just blowing my mind right now. I am a coffee drinker as of like a month ago. Like, I've spent my entire life not being a coffee drinker, and all of a sudden I am. So I'm just really, really excited about everything coffee.
You ever had their orange mocha frappuccino?
I haven't, but that sounds amazing.
I know, right? And the wife and I started drinking them after we saw it on Zoolander because they're like, orange mocha frappuccinos. We're like, that sounds delicious, actually.
Yeah, I just have to work my way past how pretentious those words all sound together.
Yes. Well, I think that was part of the joke, you know, because it was like they were all
right.
like models and stuff. So, and then they killed themselves in a fire. So, wonderful movie. So happy to have you on.
Thanks.
What are we talking about? I wanted to know about you and your story, how people can find your show. It is really amazing, and it is blowing up like crazy. So just take it away if you don't mind.
For sure, yeah. So I am a trans woman. I came out about 4 years ago and spent about a year just doing stuff locally, going to support groups, trying to help organize events and stuff like that. And then people may remember Leila Alcorn dying. She was a 17-year-old trans girl who committed suicide because of her parents basically forcing her into conversion therapy and making her life miserable. And that story resonated with me for a lot of reasons, obviously because of the religious component, me being an atheist, and her suicide note, which she left posted on her Tumblr page, talked a lot about worrying about not being able to live a life that was worth living, even if she were able to figure out how to transition and stuff. And that really resonated with me because that's the exact thing that kept me in the closet until I was 28.
Wow.
And that just kind of sparked something in me that I was like, this has got to be more than just me, like, being involved in some local groups. Like, I wanted to do LGBTQ based activism, and I was starting to want to do atheist activism, and it didn't really hit me hard until then that those were things that went together. And it was literally the night of a memorial that we put together for her that, there was a pastor there who said something that I thought was kind of gross. The crowd seemed to like it, but she basically said that she believed that God was a first responder on the highway that night. Because the way that Leila killed herself was she walked out onto the highway in front of a truck.
God was the first responder on the highway.
Yeah. And like, I used to be Christian, so I get what she's trying to say. Like, she's trying to say that, you know, God is comforting her and trying to comfort the people in the crowd with the knowledge that God is present in your struggles and that kind of stuff. And, you know, a funeral is not the place for a religious debate. I'm 100% there. But I mean, that was a really gross thing for me, because what that said to me is that God didn't care enough to step in until after she was already dead. And I was like, that's really gross. I can't, like, that's the closest I've ever come to like crashing an event like that, just speaking up like, what the fuck are you saying? And then from then it was just kind of a matter of figuring out what form that activism would take. And I'd already listened to a bunch of podcasts at that point, and I have a background in audio engineering. I used to run a recording studio. I went to school for audio engineering. Cool. So a podcast just kind of seemed like the natural fit. And I was like, you know, I really like having conversations with people. I feel like it's something I'm pretty good at. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what a podcast is, right? So let's give it a shot. And and the rest, as they say, is history. It's
almost like as if you had this thing boiling up inside you, and it was going to come out one way or the other. So you could put it into an angry, almost sounded pretty justified, but almost like a negative thing, like in that funeral at that moment. Or you could put it out in like this positive way, helping people through the podcast. And
yeah, I mean, there are a couple of dimensions to it, because I mean, my entire life, like as long as I've known that bad things happen, I wanted to be part of something that might help people. And that initially started, I was involved in an organization called A Voice for the Innocent, which is an organization that helps empower victims of sexual violence to tell their stories. And it was started by a friend of mine who is a male victim of sexual abuse. And I don't have a history with that, but it is something that I care about. And so I helped him found that organization and helped run it for the first like 2 years that it was a thing. And that was kind of my first taste of activism of any kind. And I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was important work, but it wasn't something that spoke to me personally, because it's not something that I have a personal history with. And then it started at my first Pride, actually. I had sort of just started to come into my own, realizing that I was trans and realizing that I was queer and figuring out what that meant for my life. And that year, we at A Voice for the Innocent, we went to Cincinnati Pride, and that was the first time I'd ever been to a Pride event. And you know, I'd had all of these really bad ideas in my head about what it meant to come out as gay or trans or queer or any flavor of queer or trans. And I saw tens of thousands of people that day who were actually living that life, and they were living their truth. And, they at least seemed happy. I mean, obviously, you're in an event, you're not seeing what people's entire lives are like, but I'm like, these are people who are actually living this life, and this is a thing that's possible for me. And I was like, gosh, maybe this is possible for me too. Maybe I can do this and I can be happy. And it was literally the night after Pride, I started coming out to a couple of my friends saying like, look, this is who I am. And that kind of was the start of, that was the summer, the year that Leila Alcorn. So it was 5 or 6 months before that. And yeah, it was just kind of from there. It was like, well, this is my personal thing. This is relevant to me personally. So this is something that I can speak on from my own perspective as who I am. So I kind of moved out of that into the queer and trans side of activism. And
for the listeners, I would totally recommend that you go to her YouTube page also, because you kind of cover all of the HRT transition that you went through. And can you tell us what the acronym stands for also? HRT, yeah, it's hormone replacement therapy. Second puberty, which is that's got to be absolutely crazy to go through.
It sucks almost as much as first puberty, but at least it's in the right direction.
Just less masturbation.
There's still that. Well, it's an interesting thing. So I want to preface this by saying that I'm kind of the definition of open book, and this is not a thing that should be expected. This is not a thing that should be expected of every trans person you meet. But the trans feminine hormone journey, which is, if you're assigned male at birth and you take estrogen to transition in the feminine direction, you develop a really interesting relationship with sex and sexuality, because it totally deflates your sex drive. At least it did mine. And that's a common experience. It doesn't happen to everyone, but I think the more common form of that experience is that it deflates your sex drive. But you also feel more comfortable in your body, or at least I did. So it's a really interesting combination of feelings.
Wow.
But yeah, on YouTube, so on the show, on the podcast, I try to be an educator, an advocate, that kind of thing. And on the YouTube channel, I tend to pull out the firebrand a little bit more.
Yeah.
But there are little facets of the experience that's like, well, here's a story that I can tell that like is not going to fill up a 30, 45 minute, hour long podcast episode, but it's something that's important to know about the trans experience, or my trans experience at least. And so, there's a video about an experience that I had after I had my bottom surgery, about how quickly my body felt normal to me after that surgery, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the other side. I don't put videos out quite as much as I would like to, because I don't have enough free time as it is. But yeah, that's kind of another side to the stuff that I do.
Lots of times whenever I have discussions with people about the trans community, or about, Trump says something stupid about trans people can't be in the military, what have you. It seems like once a month something about the trans community pops up on the news, and it's kind of a hot topic right now. It seems like each time that it's in the news, I end up getting in some discussion with someone, whether it's at work or just on them interwebs or what have you, and somebody says, well, okay, a man was born a man, or a woman's born a woman, or they start throwing out all these typical cliche, lots of times it's bigoted stuff, and that's at that point I'm kind of like, I don't even know if I want to have this conversation, because you're gonna piss me off, like you're just being hateful. But sometimes I also think it's just people are just ignorant of this, and they want to be able to understand it more. What kind of response would you give to someone like that, where they say, hey, it's all chromosomes, man, it's XX or XY, or if you're born this way, then that's just what you are, and I can't choose to be a different race. How can I choose to be a different gender? I mean, you've heard them all a million times, so. Oh
yeah. So the chromosomes argument is interesting, because my favorite question to ask those people is if they've ever had a karyotype done. Do you know what chromosomes you have?
I have
no you don't.
I guess I would just assume.
You know what genitalia you were born with.
Yeah.
But it's not perfectly analogous with the set of chromosomes you have. There are people who don't have XX or XY chromosomes who don't have any outward presentation of that. I have a friend who told a story about a woman who was born assigned male at birth, born with a penis, M on the birth certificate, the whole thing, came out as a trans woman, and had her bottom surgery. And in the process of the surgery, the surgeon found ovaries. She was intersexed and had no idea.
Wow. So you're saying that it's not a direct link between gender and chromosomes in the simplistic way that we think of it?
No, not at all. I mean, there's obviously a correlation, right? Because most people aren't trans. So there's definitely a correlation. But as far as a direct link between the two, definitely not. In those conditions generally are called intersex conditions, like if you have a set of chromosomes other than XX or XY. And of course, the typical response to that is like, well, we're talking about like almost no one. That's like an aberration. But like there are as many intersex people as there are redheaded people in the world. So like, if we're talking about the spectrum of human experience, that is not an aberration. It's a normal variation on the human experience. And then, I mean, ask people to identify what gender means to them when they say like, well, there are only two genders. You're a man or a woman and you're born that way. Okay. What does that mean? And the only responses that I've ever come back to are, well, what genitalia are you born with? Okay, fair. So let me ask you this question. If your genitalia is entirely informed by your genitalia. Say you're in an accident and you lose your penis. Do you change your pronouns in your name? Of course you don't, because you are who you are regardless of what your body is.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
And so, so like I've just demonstrated to you that your gender is not wrapped up in your genitalia.
And I can so see how that conversation would progress, because after that they're going to go, well, no, because of this thing. And it's almost like you're having a discussion with a religious person, and they're trying to avoid that cognitive dissonance, so they're like, okay, well, no, maybe it's not faith, but it is, I was raised this way. Okay, well, maybe being raised this way isn't the best way of characterizing why I believe this. I think it because of the Bible, and in the same way, I bet they're like, oh, well, I'm a dude because I know I'm a dude. Okay, so your gender's what? No, and I could see how you would just have to keep like stepping with them, like, okay, so what else do you have left? And I've always wondered that too, like, what is it that makes me a man? Like I'm your basic cis boring white guy, and I'm just like, but what defines me as a man? Is it some kind of sense of pride in the typical machismo kind of I'm a manly man kind of thing? Because I know a lot of women that are manlier men than me. Or is it, well, because I like you said, I have a penis? Well, if I didn't have a penis, I wouldn't be anything different than I am now. I just, have less fun. So it's a good point.
Yeah. Well, and I've spent a lot of time asking myself those questions because, do I identify as a woman because there is some immutable quality of my brain, my consciousness, my biological makeup, something like that? Is there some immutable quality of that defines me as such? Or am I measuring myself against the cultural identity that I was brought up with? So like, and I think the only honest answer I can give is that I don't honestly know the answer to that question. And I think if we're being honest, I doubt there are many people who could answer that question with anything more affirmative than I don't know. Because, how do we tell the difference between who we are as a person versus who we've been programmed to be, right? How do we parse that out? And I don't think that is – I don't want to say I don't think it's possible. I think it's incredibly difficult. And so where does that leave us, right? And the big question for me, the response to that question for me is like, well, I'm not sure that it matters, because let's say that I do figure out that I identify as a woman because the culture that I am brought up in teaches me that womanhood is this thing, and I match that thing more fully than I meet the definition of manhood that I've been programmed with, right?
Yeah.
So let's say let's say, and this is hypothetical, but let's say hypothetically I do figure out that's why I identify that way. If we're speaking completely objectively, then I can just say, okay, well, that's all bullshit. I'm just a feminine dude. Right? But that's not what I'm comfortable with. That's not where I'm at. So why does it matter? You know what I mean? What has brought me satisfaction and happiness and peace in life is being referred to in the feminine, being referred to as she, her, having my bottom surgery, undergoing hormone replacement therapy. Those are the things that have brought me peace and happiness. So like, the labels only matter in the sense that the power those labels hold in society, right? If our society didn't have such rigid concepts surrounding that, it might be easier for me to let go of the power of those words. But the fact is, those words do hold power. And so, that's the reality that we live in. So even if we acknowledge that, okay, gender is entirely socially constructed, so none of it matters. And I don't necessarily think that's true. But even if we did come down on that side, I don't really think it matters. Like, the point is, what makes you comfortable and what makes you happy? And that's the thing to do, if that makes sense.
And your answer, it's so simple. Like, what your rebuttal to these, seemingly such complicated questions in our culture today, your answer is like, yeah, that's not really a thing, or, it's no big deal. Well, I had Eric Ryder on the show from Odd Atheist Friends recently, and I was asking him, like, what is it like to be a trans person? And his answer was genius, because he just said, well, you already know what that would be like. Just imagine if you were in a woman's body and everyone referred to you as a woman, how would you feel throughout your day? Would it bother you at all? And I was like, oh, yeah, of course. That makes perfect sense. And it makes me wonder, between the conversation we're having right now and the conversation that I had with Eric, are these questions just really this easy to answer, and we just have this kind of weird cultural stigma to it that keeps us from feeling like we already understand in so many ways? Like this really isn't that big of a deal. This really isn't that controversial. It's just like I don't know, like we feel kind of weird asking ourselves about it, maybe. Like what is it that's in the psychological thing that's keeping people from just being able to get this easier, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that these questions are a lot easier than some people make them out to be. And so there's an important distinction to make, because a lot of these questions really are hard questions, but the answers that really matter are the easy ones, because the answers that really matter are the answers of how do we treat people, right? Yeah. So if someone comes to me and says, I'm a non-binary person, my pronouns are they, them, the only correct answer for me to give is okay. It's not difficult, right? Now, I can, as a person in my own curiosity, that not being my experience, I can ask all kinds of questions about what that means for that person. But I'm not entitled to that information. That's just me as a person wanting to have a better understanding of the human experience. But at the end of the day, what really matters is how we treat people, right? So those questions are very, very easy to answer. And the reason why I think people find those things difficult is because our society does have so much of a person's worth wrapped up in their gender, right? A man's worth is in his ability to work, or his ability to push his emotions down and be quote unquote manly. A woman's worth is wrapped up in her ability to produce children, to be a good wife, to be a good cook, all of those like traditional gender roles that we have. And our society teaches us that that's what's important. And even when people who aren't trans step outside of those gender roles, we are very uncomfortable with that. Think of like a woman who's a car mechanic, you know what I mean? Or like a guy who likes to wear nail polish and dresses, right? Those are things that our society is generally very uncomfortable with. And it's because we are taught that so much of our value is wrapped up in how we fit those gender roles. And I think there is a level at which most people realize that's bullshit. It's a very tenuous position to be in. And so trans people represent a very direct threat to people's security in their own roles in gender. And I think that's why people are generally so hostile to us, because we represent that. Because I am a person who, if I wasn't trans, generally speaking, I'd be near the apex of privilege, right? Like I'm not rich, but I'm pretty solidly middle class, white. I like women, so if I wasn't trans, I'd be straight. You know, like I would be pretty near the apex of privilege, and I would have a very, very comfortable life, speaking generally. So in the eyes of someone who is that, and who is very comfortable in that, and has a lot of their own self-worth wrapped up in that, they see me living the life that I'm living, and I'm happy and more comfortable in myself not fitting into those roles. You know, I didn't choose to be who I am, but in their eyes, I am choosing to step outside of that life that they have been told is the default life, right? And so that's a very, very uncomfortable thing for them to witness, and a very, very difficult thing for them to accept, if that makes sense. I
remember when the LGBTQ acronym first came out, or at least everybody was just starting to use it, and it was always this reoccurring joke of, you know, I'm going to say it, but I'm going to add a bunch of letters and numbers and stuff, you know, so somebody would be like, I don't know if the LGBTRNPSTUV cares about this, but we're going to, you know, it's like, remember that was always like a thing, and it's starting to go away, but even politicians would do it, you know, like it was just such a common thing. And I remember hearing that and thinking like, that's so much like if we were to go back to, you know, early 1920s or whatever, and somebody's like, you know, like we all hate Jews, right? Ha ha ha. Yeah, and it's right on the nose of just, I'm just gonna make fun of this minority just because it's different, and we're all aware.
We're easy targets.
Yeah,
we're easy targets, especially trans people. Like being gay isn't quite the thing that it used to be. I mean, being gay is still not normal in society, but I feel like it's a lot more normalized than it used to be. But trans people are the big, like, dark, scary question mark in society at this point. And so just like with lots of issues, 50 years ago, it's something that society is generally pretty ignorant about. So it's very easy to fearmonger and to paint people's fears onto us because, lots of people are blank slates when it comes to trans people. A lot of people, they've heard the word, they don't even know what it means. So the first time they hear about trans people, what they hear is, we're coming into the bathrooms after your kids. And so now, instead of having someone who knows nothing and educating them out of honest ignorance, now we're deep into, oh, you're a threat to me, and I have to now convince you that I'm not actually a threat. And we know, generally speaking, the psychology of conservatism is the psychology of fear. And so now we have not just ignorance to work through, but fear and ignorance to work through. And that's a very secure position for conservatives to put people in. So that's how we get painted as the other and as the threat.
Yeah. And I always like the idea of whatever somebody brings that up of the bathroom, or the real scary one's the locker room, right? Because everybody's just naked running around, popping each other with towels. For some reason, we all think it's Porky's. But I always like to ask, like, what scenario is your kid seeing naked people anyway? Are you just sending them into random locker rooms with naked people in them? Like, how does this happen? This isn't even a thing, but we all pretend like, hey, we have to defend against this horrible potential scenario. And I think one really good point, that just to reference Eric again, that he had brought up, because I said, well, hey, I can kind of, as a parent, I can understand the fear idea, right? And not from a bigoted place, but just like, okay, this one, the locker room one, I can kind of understand. But he says, but how do you think a trans person feels? Like, this isn't just your problem. You know what I mean? This isn't just something that you might go, I'm not really sure how to handle this. This is something that none of us really are sure how to handle, even though it's a unlikely scenario. But even in that unlikely scenario, how do you think they feel? Like, they're the ones that are sitting there having to figure out, am I going to cause someone else to be afraid? Or am I going to be judged a certain way? Or which bathroom should I go into? Because this Waffle House looks kind of redneck today, and I don't want to cause any problems. So, I mean, I think we forget to try to think about how the other person feels. And I think it comes down to just the basic idea of seeing someone as an other.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I tell people that all the time. Like, if there is a trans person in the bathroom, I guarantee you the person who is the most scared in the bathroom and the person who is most under threat in the bathroom or locker room or any space is the trans person. I promise you. Like, and the statistics back that up, right? Like,
I would be terrified.
Trans people are not all pure-hearted. There are some terrible trans people who do things to hurt other people because trans people are human beings, and that's what human beings do. But if we're speaking about who is actually under threat and who is actually likely to experience violence, it is not the other people. It is the trans person in the bathroom or the locker room, etc. Period. Like, and even as a person who is generally read as a woman in public, and it's been a long time since I've gotten those like rude stares, rude comments, anything like that. I still, hair stands up on the back of my neck. I'm like staring at the floor, getting from the door to the stall as quickly as I can, washing my hands as quickly as I can, and getting the hell out as fast as I can. Just because you never know, and, like, especially when I'm by myself. It's just not something that you can ever afford to let your guard down on. And like, I promise you that cis people rarely feel that kind of threatened in bathrooms. It's just not something that most people ever even think of.
Yeah. I've never had to experience that, and that's just a privilege that I've never even considered. Have you had any kind of situations where someone was really rude to you or something, and you had to figure out some way to get through this social dilemma?
Thankfully not. I mean, I have had people say rude things to me and like comments under their breath and that kind of stuff. I've never had someone like get in my face and actually confront me. I've never experienced violence, thankfully. But I've definitely had the like people walk by and they're like snickering and whispering to their friends, and I walk into the bathroom and you hear somebody say something rude under their breath while they're staring at you, but like thankfully they keep walking. They don't like that I've never been like directly confronted and had to like find my way out of a threatening situation, thankfully.
What does it say about our culture that anytime someone's different, we become the biggest perverts about how we try to label that person or objectify that person. Like, but with like the gay community, for example. Oh, if you're going to let them marry each other, what are they going to do next? They're going to start marrying animals, or like equating just two people that are in love to bestiality for some reason. Or whenever it's like with trans people, it's like, oh, for some reason this person identifies as something that doesn't make sense to me, so therefore they're a pedophile. And it's just like our culture just immediately goes to the most horrible, perverted kind of idea. And like, what does that say about us as a community,
Well, I think there's a couple of things to unpack there, because the thing that's difficult is I do think there is some base human instinct to be distrustful and maybe even fearful of things that are unknown. Because, I think back to like, imagine early humans 150,000 years ago in the jungle. If you hear the grass rustling next to you, you have to assume that's a threat if you don't know what it is. Because if you assume it's a threat and you're wrong, you've lost nothing. If you don't assume it's a threat and you're wrong, you can die, right? So I think there is a bit of that instinct baked into us as human beings. But that's not an excuse. That doesn't make it acceptable, because obviously lots of people have gotten past that about other people, right? Yeah. And I think the trick is to expand our idea of what our in-groups are, right? So obviously human beings are more prone to care about people the closer to us they are, right? That's why when a family member dies, we're devastated. When someone on the other side of the planet that we don't know dies, it's like, oh gosh, that's sad. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we're obviously going to care about things that are closer to us. And that's the in-group, out-group dynamic that maybe it's a cultural instinct. Maybe it's a species level instinct. I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist or a sociologist. But the point is that can be overcome because lots of us have overcome it. And so, like, I almost hesitate when I say that, because it feels like I'm almost giving people an excuse. Like, well, yeah, it's understandable that you're fearful and mistrustful of, like, I don't want to send people that message that it's like it's okay to be afraid of things that are different.
But I get what you're saying. Like, you're just trying to understand and say, hey, this doesn't justify your actions, but I get the motivation behind it, and it's okay to
right.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. It's a cool perspective and a very non-judgmental way to look at someone being judgmental, which that takes a lot.
And in my mind, I mean, I just have to think about it like, okay, this is a person who is some level of different from me. Is there something legitimately threatening about this person? If there is, okay, then I recoil, then I protect myself, whatever. But if not, I mean, to me, that's exciting. It's an opportunity for me to learn something new. And like, and again, that's a difficult instinct for me, because I never want to see someone as like, oh, you exist to expand my mind and educate me. Like, no, you're a person and you exist for your own purposes. Like, your value is not inherent to like what you exist to teach me. Like, I don't want to be that person, but I do kind of see it in that way. It's like, well, this is an opportunity for me to expand my view of what humanity is and what the human experience is. And it's not something to be recoiled from or something to fear. It's something to embrace. And I don't know. I think that's kind of the base of the attitude that I think is wrong about so much of our culture and that's why I love Star Trek so much. It's like, the idea of, oh God, so much. But the basic idea is that, difference in variety is like, that's something to be excited about. It's not something to recoil from and be afraid of.
So you totally derailed the whole conversation, because now I got to ask you, did you hear about Tarantino considering directing another Star Trek film?
I did, and I am so ambivalent.
Really? I'm so
Yes.
excited. Like, I'm a huge Tarantino fan. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. But I'm already ahead of you. I'm getting like this psychic moment. I know it's in your head. You're thinking, why would we let this totally different kind of genre fuck up this thing that we have with Star Trek, right?
Oh, it's not even that. I'm kind of ambivalent about Tarantino, to be honest.
What?
I know that's heresy. Because I mean, I'm all for
We're 90s
Star Trek
kids,
being
right?
different. Like, yeah, I mean, I love Star Trek Discovery, and it's not like any of the other Star Treks. I'm okay with different Star Trek. Tarantino Star Trek, I don't know.
I didn't look at it because it looked like a Voyager remake. The Discovery thing. That was my thing with Voyager. It was like they left the story to try to make like this very politically correct, all-inclusive message, which is cool because that's what Star Trek always was. And it was the first white and black kiss on television, right? And it was Next Generation was the first time that they started discussing, even trans issues or gay issues or anything like that. And I thought that, that's so cool, but it's like, that's all Voyager was, we're going to have each character of the show of a different race. And then we're also going to have like a after school special message in every other episode. And it was like, all right, guys, I'm liberal, but I'm not that liberal, give me and then whenever Discovery came out, I'm like, that looks like Voyager. So I didn't check it out, but is it kind of cool?
Oh, I love it. The first few episodes are very not Star Trek as we know Star Trek to be, but it definitely settles into that. And there are lots of things that I like about it. There are certain like quibbles that I have, but, I also strongly disagree with your characterization of Voyager. I get where you're coming from. Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, my favorite series in order are DS9, TNG, Voyager, and Enterprise, and then the original series.
DS9 sucked. But they just stayed in one spot.
Get the fuck out of my life. I'm hanging up the Skype call right now.
I just screwed up. You're never going to be a guest again.
We used to be friends, and now we're not.
Well, but they didn't. That was my problem. Was they just stayed in one spot, and like everybody that's not Trek nerds is so disappointed with the direction of this conversation. But they got the
Defiant in season 3, and they went all over the place.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of cool. Okay, good point. Honestly, after Jean-Luc, I just couldn't do it again. I didn't want to get hurt again. That was 7 years of happiness for me, and then it was over. So I guess I haven't really liked anything since TNG. So I don't want to give something else a chance.
That's fair. I can understand that.
But anyway, so back to the point. One of the reasons that I wanted to have you on was for anybody that might be listening to this and they're trans themselves, or if they have some questions themselves about their identity or something like that. Do you know of a good resource if they're being verbally assaulted or in any way, or if they're scared, or if they're confused, or if they're maybe even wanting to hurt themselves or anything like that? Is there a place for them to go that would be a good resource?
Well, there's a few different ones. So if somebody's in crisis, the Trans Lifeline is a great place to go. It's a suicide hotline staffed by trans people, for trans people. And they're an amazing resource if somebody's in immediate crisis. Outside of that, my best advice is honestly just find your allies and hold on for dear fucking life. I was talking with somebody on Facebook last night. They reached out and they said, my kid is expressing some gender difference. I don't really know if my kid is trans necessarily, but there's some sort of gender nonconformity happening there. And what do we do? And honestly, I think the most valuable thing that someone can know is that I love you no matter who you turn out to be. And whatever happens to you along this journey, we're right here with you, and we're not going to necessarily solve the world's problems and fix everything by loving and supporting people. You know what I mean? That's not going to solve the bigger systemic problems that we face. But on an individual level, just knowing that people honestly and truly give a shit is a huge thing. Yeah. So my advice would, find support groups, whether it's online or locally in person. Find that one friend, find that one family member. And I always like to say, dip your toes into the conversation, and the visibility and the conversation that's happening around trans issues now is very much a double-edged sword, because on one hand, the awareness can bring an increased blowback on trans people, but it also means that it's in the public consciousness. So you can bring it up without necessarily throwing suspicion on yourself. So you can start a conversation about Laverne Cox or, that kind of stuff, and just kind of gauge people's reactions about, the things that they say about those issues. And you can sort of identify the people who are safe, or at least with some degree of confidence. I mean, people are always going to surprise you either way. Like, you'll probably be surprised of people who are accepting who you wouldn't expect, and people who are assholes that you wouldn't expect. So that's something to always be prepared for. But I think if there's anything that I can say is that it's probably a little easier than it used to be to identify the people who are safe for you to express who you are to. And that's valuable. So like when I came out, I identified like, okay, this is the person who I am 100% positive is going to be good with it. And so I confided in her, and we did a little self-exploration, and that gave me the confidence to sort of expand the circle a little bit and say like, okay, these are some other friends that I trust. These are some family members that I trust. And then once you've got that foundation set, and you know that like if shit goes wrong, things go bad, you've got this foundation to fall back on. So worst case scenario, you've got this group of one person or two people or 5 or 6 people that like if your entire fucking world falls apart, you've still got these people. Because I think one of the most valuable things that a person can be confident in is that like somebody's got their back. You know what I mean? So like if you can identify a few people that you can say that about, then you're in a much stronger position than you might be otherwise. So like I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying like find your allies and hold on for dear life.
That is fantastic. I'm really glad I asked that question now. Hey, while you were talking though, it made me wonder something else. And I know your time's valuable, so I won't hold it too much longer. But real quick, did you always kind of know that you weren't a dude, or is this something like just one day? Like, can you help?
I shouldn't say always.
Okay.
It started around puberty, and some people, you hear a lot of people say like as soon as they're old enough to like have thoughts, they know.
You were like a dude's dude. I mean, you were like you had the beard and. You were in the band, you had the beer
metal
belly,
band. Yep.
Like you were just like somebody looking at you would be like, that's that is a football loving typical guy with the skull ring in his jeans, or maybe they would go too far.
Right. Yeah, no, that's and that a lot of that was deliberate. I mean, so I knew around what's that?
Like an overcompensating thing, or.
Oh, totally.
Oh my God.
So I first kind of got the inkling about being different when it comes to gender around, I was like 10, and like that's around the time puberty starts. And, to make a super long story short, like I saw girls going through puberty and I saw boys going through puberty, and I knew that I was going the wrong direction. And, obviously this was 23 years ago. So like, I mean, I'd never heard the word transgender. I didn't know people like me existed. So like, I just thought there was something really wrong with me. So I just never said anything to anybody. But like, I knew in my head that like what I'm supposed to be, what everyone assumes I am, is not actually what I am. And like, I don't even know that I had the vocabulary to conceptualize it like that. But like looking back on it now, I can understand like that's where my thought processes were. And so, throughout my life, it was like, oh, okay, so like, I know this is what I'm supposed to be. So what can I do to make sure everyone knows that I'm this thing? So like, let's grow a big ass beard, like, what I mean? And different things like that. And playing in bands. And I mean, I am very much into music anyways. It's like, even if I was born a cis woman, I probably would have been a musician,
right.
And played in bands and all that kind of stuff. But it was all very convenient cover as well. And even then, I mean, I still, when I was to everyone else, I was ostensibly a dude. I mean, I was still kind of known as being someone who was like more sensitive than most people. Like I still cried pretty easily and was like pretty vulnerable and sensitive and that kind of stuff. But like, thankfully I had a group of friends that it was like, I just kind of got poked fun at every once in a while. No one was ever really mean to me or like made me feel less than or anything like that. It was just kind of a joke. Like, we make fun of this one guy for this one thing and we make fun of you because you cry a lot. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't anything vicious or anything like that. And
yeah.
And I happily played into that role. But yeah, it was very much a costume. And it was really interesting what happened when because I posted the first picture of my Facebook without a beard. I hadn't come out yet, but I had shaved the beard off because of that. And I mean, people lost their fucking minds. Like, oh my God, where's the beard? And I'm like, oh my God, if you only knew what was actually happening in my life right now. And I wrote that into my into the note that I posted on Facebook when I came out to everyone. I actually wrote that in like so lots of people are wondering what happened to the beard, and there's more to that story.
It's almost like the day you shave the beard, somebody asks you like, wait till tomorrow. That one's gonna really blow your mind.
Yep, that was kind of what I was thinking.
Whenever somebody says something like, you can just choose to be whatever you want and then change your mind, and it's really like, that's such a mischaracterization, because the way that you're describing it is this isn't anything flippant, or this isn't like one day people just wake up and they're like, oh, I feel this way. That's not how it works at all. Obviously, like, this is something that you dealt with for kind of what I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of like your whole life, but you don't really start noticing these things until puberty, just like anyone else, anyone that's just cis or something like that. Like, that's when we all start figuring this stuff out, right?
Yeah, well, and I mean, there are lots of trans people who don't figure out who they are until later on. I mean, I know people who didn't come out until they were in their 50s or 60s. You know, there's a very wide spectrum of experience there.
How does that work?
I don't know.
I mean, I guess everybody's got their own journey, I guess.
Yeah, well, and I've heard it described a bunch of different ways. You know, I've heard it described as like some people are better at denial than others. Some people, I mean, literally just don't even have any of those feelings until later in life. And I don't pretend to understand that psychology.
And we don't have
but
to.
For me,
I hate to cut you off, but
that's exactly it.
That's kind of my take, is whenever I am having a conversation with someone, and you know, I don't have the answers like as quickly and come up with them as fluidically as you do, because I don't have your experience, you know. So that's why I like to try to learn and ask questions about things that I don't understand as well. But times that I don't have an answer, my rebuttal is always, you know what, just take their word for it. Like, what's the big deal? If somebody says, this is who I am, the next answer, kind of like what you said earlier, is, okay, cool. You know, what does it hurt you? This big, just difficult shift in the dynamic of our discussion where you have to start disproving every single thing that I could possibly ask you. Just go, okay, that's cool, man.
Yeah. I mean, I use that often in those arguments. Like, how are you harmed by calling me she, even though I was born with a penis? Like, what am I taking away from you by doing that? And I mean, obviously nobody ever has a good answer for that. You know, it's because I care about facts and facts matter and blah, blah. Like, okay, dude, like, I get it. You're a good skeptic. Okay.
Right.
I think about my own experience, and like, in the grand scheme of things, as far as the trans experience goes, I have one of the most positive stories of anyone that I know. Like, I don't talk to my grandma anymore. I don't talk to my aunt anymore. And I lost a job, and those things all suck. But like, largely, as far as like my immediate family, my mom, my brother, my sister, my circle of friends, like that kind of stuff, I have been largely affirmed and loved and supported through this entire thing.
That's so great.
And I have still, it's amazing, but I've still gone through things that I wouldn't wish on anyone, and things that I would never choose to go through. Like, I had bottom surgery 4 months ago, and I mean, I went through some of the worst pain that I've ever experienced in my life, and spent a whole lot of money that I would love to have spent on other things.
What is bottom surgery?
Having your penis surgically reformed into a vagina.
I thought it was like each time you said bottom surgery, I'm like, so you had like your butt worked on, but like what they do to your butt? Like, I thought we all had the same butts. Like, that's one thing we have in common.
There's all kinds of terminology that people use. I just call it bottom surgery, but sex reassignment surgery, gender confirmation surgery. A lot of people call it a lot of different things.
Is it okay to talk about that for a sec?
Totally.
I appreciate how at the beginning you said, hey, not everybody is as open as I am. So,
yes,
you know,
that's important.
And I feel like we kind of, anytime somebody starts talking about trans issues, the first thing is like, oh, so what'd you get your dick cut off? And it's like, well, hold on, dude. Like,
right.
Do you just meet someone, you know, or it's like,
right.
You have a new coworker or something. It's like their first day. And you're like, hey, tell me about your genitals. Like, this isn't normal to just bring this up out of nowhere, but I appreciate you being so open, though.
Yeah, and well, I also enjoy that, because if somebody's talking about facts and accuracy, no, I didn't have my dick cut off. Actually, I had it turned inside out. Thank you.
Whoa.
because that's what it is. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's the basic process.
So they slit it like a hot dog or something, and I don't like how does that work?
Kinda. I will preface this by saying, again, generally speaking, it's a bad idea to ask trans people about their genitals, but I started this conversation, so it's fine. And so there are a couple of conversations that I'll preface it by saying this. Okay. There are a few conversations that happen around trans surgery. A lot of people, when they ask about trans surgery, they ask because of the shock factor, right? Because it's just so outlandish to someone that someone would want to have their genitals surgically rearranged, that like they want to be shocked by that story. It's the shock value that they're interested in, right? And some people, when they ask, it's out of a genuine want to know, like, I am really interested in how this improves the quality of your life. And that's the conversation that I will have all day long because, okay, so 4 months out, I don't even have all of my sensation back down there. I don't really have sexual function at the moment. And I am still in a better place with my body than I was with a fully functioning penis. I'm more comfortable. Things feel more right to me. So like, even if I'm never able to have sex again, this was still a better situation for me than having a fully functioning penis. If that lets you know just like the order of magnitude on how uncomfortable I was with the previous arrangement of my body.
Just that statement alone, like that kind of blew my mind. Like I'm trying to think how I would feel.
And I am a sexual person, but yeah, so the mechanism of the surgery, I mean, really, so they remove all of the stuff inside your penis and like surgically create a canal to turn it inside of, and they just kind of like surgically reattach your urethra to the top of it, and they make a clitoris out of the head of the penis and just kind of like sew it all back together in that arrangement. And it's not even an incredibly difficult surgery to do because in utero, we start out formed as basically what we call biologically female. I mean, that's the clumsy terminology to use, but like what people generally think of as biologically female is how we all start out. So they're kind of just like rearranging your organs back the way that they were in utero for that kind of surgery, which is really interesting. So
is that like, so the testicles, do they kind of go like where the ovaries would go kind of thing? Or
no, they just go away.
Okay. They just go away.
Yep. Which means that I don't have to take a testosterone blocker anymore. Hooray!
Oh, neat. So what about like replacing the estrogen that you might need? Is that like a pill thing?
Yeah, I just take pills every day. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Some people do a gel, some people do injections. I take pills.
So in a way, it's kind of like dudes' vaginas. Like whenever we were babies or something, it's like our vaginas kind of fell out and then they hang on the outside.
I mean, yeah. Like obviously it's obviously an imprecise way to put it, but I mean, basically, yeah.
I thought that was the scientific way. That was about as scientific as I get. So that
right.
Is that not how they refer to it in the medical field? Your vagina fell out, sir.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as hormones go, I mean, the best way to describe it really is like I take the same basic cocktail of medications that a postmenopausal woman takes to replace hormones after menopause. Oh. It's the same kind of thing.
Well, that's not really so weird.
No, it's really not.
That's the cool thing is once you remove just the initial stigma and that concept of the other or this is different, and you just talk about these sorts of things, it's really not such a shocker. And I like what you said about some people just ask these questions just for the shock value. And even in that regard, like after talking to you about it, like it's like, oh, that's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. So in some ways it is, right? But it's it's a very big deal to the trans person, but it shouldn't be a big deal to anyone else.
I see what you're saying.
You know?
Yeah, that part you said about the testicles just go away. That would like, I just, whoa. Like,
okay. Just shudder a little bit.
Yeah, like, yeah. Whoa, that was a lot to process for me.
Right.
I'm very attached to them, literally and figuratively, and
right, yeah, which I get, right? Like if you've got that and it's the thing that makes sense to you, yeah, absolutely.
What's the fear level that a person must go through before a surgery like that? Like that's got to be pretty intense.
I'll preface this again by saying there's a spectrum of experience along these lines, but honestly, the only fear that I had is just the general fear around surgery. Like, I don't like being under anesthesia. I don't like taking pain meds. I don't like being in pain and that kind of thing. Like, as far as the change to my body goes, I was mildly nervous because obviously it's surgery and there are some risks. Like, I mean, I went into it knowing that 2 to 3% of people who have that surgery come out of it with no sexual function. Like, sometimes the nerves just don't wake up because, we don't live in the 24th century. And so I was nervous about those kinds of things. Yeah. But as far as the actual change to my body goes, like, to give you an idea of how bad dysphoria got, at least for me, and there is a spectrum. Dysphoria refers to that feeling of discomfort related to the disconnect between the way that your body is and the way that you feel it should be. And I mean, there were times where it was so bad, I would be laying in bed, crying my eyes out, and I would think to myself, like, you know what? I'm going to go grab a knife. I'm going to call 911, tell them I need an ambulance, and cut my dick and my testicles off as the ambulance pulls into the parking lot. So, like, I know that, like, I'll end up in the hospital and I'll be okay. But, like, this is so bad. This has to be fixed right now.
It's like you were hurting all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And thankfully, the moments that it got that bad were rare. But, I mean, there was also just a sort of a general discomfort and a sort of general, like, I just really fucking hate my body right now and that kind of thing. And so, the idea that was going away, I mean, that overrode every other thing that I was generally nervous about. And, 4 months out from now, even if things never get past where they are, it was still the right decision for me. And I mean, I went through some scary stuff. I had a bleeding episode. I ended up in an ambulance and in the emergency room because I had a problem with bleeding, and I experienced the most pain I've ever experienced in my life. I got mildly addicted to painkillers. Like, thankfully that was, I just had some insomnia and some digestive problems. It wasn't like the serious, like, life altering kind of addiction, but like, all of those really unpleasant things
still affected your life though. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was all 100% worth it. Like, I don't have any regrets. Aside from the fact, like, I probably would have gone to a different surgeon because our surgeon's office didn't have their shit together administratively. Like, that's literally the only thing that I would change. Like, I'm happy with the actual surgical results and the surgeon as an individual. Just like her office didn't really have their shit together, and that, like, caused problems. But, like, that's literally the only thing that I would change about the experience.
Once again, I really appreciate how open you're being. I've learned a lot. I hope the listeners have learned a lot too, and I appreciate your time today. How can people find your show, Gaytheist Manifesto, and how can people learn more about you, or even contact you if they have questions themselves and want to respectfully probe into your life like we did today?
For sure, yeah. It's the Gaytheist Manifesto. GaytheistManifesto.com. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, pretty much anywhere you find podcasts. I do another show called The Queer Side, which is more of like a storytelling kind of show that you can also find iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you can find podcasts. I'm at Gaytheist Callie on Twitter. I'm Callie Wright on Facebook. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Right. You can contact me at Facebook or at Twitter at Right to Reason 1. Also at the website, therighttoreason.com. Support us at patreon.com/Right Music, brought to us by Jason Camo of ALostStateOfMind.com. Next week, we get back into philosophy with the smartest person I have ever met, Ozymandias Ramses II. He and I disagree about atheism and the nature of reality itself, and we're going to try to understand one another's positions on that. Callie was awesome. Please go check out her shows. They're done very well, and a potential place of support to any of you that feel you're alone in your transition. You are not alone. Callie and I both support you and want you to feel comfortable to reach out to people like her that can help direct you on this journey. You can reach out to me as well. I don't pretend to understand it all, but I am capable of listening. You have the right to reason.